Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the start of the 6th season of Artwork, our series here at Lang. This series brings innovative artists to Lang to talk about their work. I'm Bonnie Maranka on the theater faculty at Lang and curator of this series. The first of our 4 guests this academic year is the director, performer, and video artist, Brian Rogers. He's also the co-founder and artistic director of the Chocolate Factory in Long Island City, which is one of the lively spaces devoted to contemporary performance and writing. I think it is especially important for us to invite artists whose creativity reflects the artist of today, who works across many different art forms, especially performance and visual arts. Brian Rogers has collaborated with many dance, music, and theater artists in a wide variety of venues that include the Movement Research Festival, Abrams Arts Center, and Dance Space, among others. This openness to the multiplicity of artistic crossovers, to the ideal of experimenting with new forms, and in the company of many different artists, characterizes some of the most exciting work today. In the process, pushing the frontiers of what we define as performance. More than that, Brian Rogers exemplifies the kind of artist who has made a commitment to the larger performance world by founding and running a nonprofit institution as producer and curator. That calls for turning away from one's own work to help others realize their ambitions, a much larger vision of one's place in art practice, a commitment to a larger ecosystem, let's say. It demands an enormous amount of time, creative energy, fundraising, cultivating audiences, managing a staff, and doing all the kinds of things that take one away from one's own work. At the Chocolate Factory, Brian Rogers also runs the Visiting Artist Program, now in its 7th year, supporting the work of more than 100 artists in theater, dance, music, and media. The Chocolate Factory provides support to visiting artists in the form of space, commissions, payments, residency periods, and general support for their work. Coincidentally, the founders of Big Dance Theater, who were here last year for artwork, and the playwright Sybil Kempson, who will be teaching playwriting here in the spring, are soon about to open their own show at the Chocolate Factory. A few weeks ago, some of us went to Queens to see Brian Rogers' latest work, Hot Box, set entirely in an immersive environment with projections and real-time images. Last year, in an interview in the Brooklyn Rail, he spoke about running an institution, especially the question of staying small and the edgy existence of being on the margins. I'm sure our guest will have very special insights on the nonprofit world of experimental performance and the kinds of questions artists are asking today. Sometimes the questions are very simple. How can I make this? Where will it take me? What response do I have to the world that I live in? On behalf of the students and faculty, I'd like to welcome Brian Rogers to our artwork series. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks to Bonnie and everyone for inviting me to be here. It's really great. I don't often get to talk about what it is that I do in front of people, so it'll be interesting to find out what that's like to do. So I thought that I would sort of break this up. I'm probably going to ramble a lot, but I wanted to break it up sort of into chunks. I wanted to talk about first sort of how it is that I came to found a venue and run a venue, and how that relates to my artistic work, and then to talk some about the work that I make. I came to New York in 1995, right after college, so 17 years ago or so, and I thought that I was going to be a theater director in a kind of, I guess, more traditional sense. I thought that I was going to direct plays that had actors in them. And those plays would tell stories, and they would, and I really immediately in New York encountered I sort of came to New York and saw the Worcester Group and how my mind exploded and sort of realized that there was this entire other kind of possible way of working and this whole other world of audiences that were really engaged in seeing this other kind of work. There was this, when I came to New York in the mid-90s, there was this really vibrant little stretch of theaters on Ludlow Street on the Lower East Side. The neighborhood is completely different now. You wouldn't recognize it. But there was this stretch of 7 or 8 really small, like matchbook-sized performance spaces where all of this amazing stuff was happening. There are companies like Elevator Repair Service, that maybe you've heard of them, were doing work there. Richard Maxwell was doing work there. But there was this kind of energy that was not at all based on stability or money of any kind. Artists were working for a cut of the door. These venues didn't really have any financial support in terms of funding. They didn't have long leases. They weren't being run by quote unquote professionals. And there was something really exciting about that for me. But all those venues came and went in the span of 6 or 7 years. They were all gone. The real estate situation in New York is such that if you don't plan for the future, you lose out very quickly when the next wave of whatever it is comes through. So that was really actually an early lesson for me. And I started doing work in some of these venues like Nada or the House of Candles, or there's a place called the Piano Store that's now a music venue called Pianos. No one came to see this work. It was made for $10. No one got paid. No one came to review the work. And it was the best time of my life. None of us cared. I think Kenneth would know what I mean when I say this. Like there's a thing about there's a thing when you're working just because you want to work and you're not really worrying about career things. There's something really kind of wonderful about that, because you're not trying to work. You're not worrying about the grant that you have to get or the review that you need to get or any of those things. So I started to work in that way. I was working, and I was still working really in a kind of a somewhat normal or traditional kind of format. I was, casting actors from Backstage magazine and rehearsing shows for a month and doing them for a weekend or 2 weekends. But then I sort of gradually I find that way of working very frustrating, and I very, very gradually learned what about that way of working was frustrating, and very slowly, gradually learned how to find new strategies of working to circumvent my frustrations. And so this is we're talking about like a 6 or 7 year period where I would make a show every year or twice a year, and I sort of moved up some. So it was always kind of a self-produced kind of way of working. Either when the theaters on the Lower East Side started to disappear, I started to work at a venue called Here Art Center, and I very gradually realized that I was beginning to work with technology, which I'll get much more into a little bit further down the road. But I started to work with video and started to realize that working in rented rehearsal rooms by the hour was not productive for me. So we got a loft on West 38th Street when it was still really, really cheap to get a loft in the Garment District, and had that as a rehearsal room. We had that room for 4 or 5 years, and just use it to make work in, and then we would take that work and load it into a theater and do the show in a rented theater for a month. And then at a certain point around that time, this New York shifted in this way where venues started to pop up outside of Manhattan, and it seemed like it was suddenly not really a stigmatized kind of thing to open a space in Brooklyn, mostly Brooklyn then, but also in Queens. And I happened to live in Queens, and literally for selfish economic reasons, it suddenly made sense to try to open a space of my own simply so that I could work in it. I had not to be a presenter or any of the things that I am today. It was really just about the economics of renting space to make work in, renting theaters to perform in, all of the sort of the producing strategies that people use and the costs behind them. It became clear that it was actually going to be economically advantageous to have my own place. And that took a long time to get to that place. And so as I said, I really did it for completely selfish reasons. I wanted a space to support my own work. I had no interest at that time in working with other artists in a curatorial or administrative or support capacity. It wasn't something I had ever thought I could do. I had no training to do it or background in doing it whatsoever. But from the moment that the place opened, so we moved, that you saw a photo of it in the earlier slide. It's just this really simple, relatively small, marginally renovated industrial space in Long Island City. It's just a garage, really. We didn't do much to it. We removed a whole bunch of old machinery and cleaned it up and put a bathroom in it, and that was kind of all we did. So we opened it. We didn't even really announce the place to the world, really. But there was suddenly a huge amount of interest from artists to do things there, which is not really surprising, I suppose. There's just so few spaces in New York anymore for people to work in that people really wanted to do things there right away. And I had to figure out what to do about that. And at a certain point, I sort of realized that there was something possibly really great about building a kind of community where, no, community is the wrong word, a kind of a conversation between the work that I was trying to make and the work that other people were trying to make, that it could sort of not in a structured way, but in a just natural way kind of inform each other, and sort of not, I guess, rather than trying to kind of insert myself into the community of venues that already existed in New York and try to compete with them or gain some traction with them, I could just do my own thing and build a kind of universe around that. And I realized that the only way to do that was to become a curator and a presenter in the sense that I wasn't going to charge artists. I wasn't going to rent the space. I wasn't going to charge artists to use it, and I was going to curate what happened there so that I could, whether the work was good or bad, and a lot of it was bad, I could say, well, I chose it. I have some degree of ownership over that choice. Because the venues that I had been working in before were largely rental venues, and they didn't necessarily have a clear or distinct artistic vision. You wouldn't go to the venue and know what you were going to see, or have any faith that what you were going to see had any relationship to the place itself. And there's still a lot of that kind of thing happening in New York. But there aren't that many places like, not to say that I'm special, but there aren't that many, sadly, there aren't that many places in New York where you can go and feel like, well, whatever I'm going to see here, there's something behind the choice. So I really wanted to have some kind of an ownership over the spirit of the place, and so I became accidentally a curator. I mean, Kenneth actually was one of the very first artists that came to the Chocolate Factory and did work. And this is going back, this is probably 2007 or 2006 or something like that, yeah. So that's kind of the timeline. We found that building in 2004. We kind of opened it to the world in 2005. And it didn't really become a professional operation in the sense that it is now. And professional meaning that I get paid to work there and that a few other people get paid to work there as well until 2009. So it was a very long period of time of volunteer labor and no money and very little support, and the artists were not being asked to give me any money, but they weren't really getting any money from me either. And that gradually improved over time. It's much better now. But the one thing that I definitely, and the reason I brought up the spaces on the Lower East Side that I had this sort of soft spot for, is it harkened back to something that people would talk about when I was in college that I didn't really experience directly, and then I met a lot of artists in New York that would talk about these places that they used to work in the 80s. The Pyramid Club or 8BC or King Tut's Wawa Hut, or these places where work was, and I mean Neil worked in a lot of these places, I think, and these places where, well, it's a complete constructed fantasy in my head. I was not there for any of this stuff. But this idea of New York where it was possible to be an artist and not have to worry about money as much, and you would do work in these grungy club spaces that weren't necessarily around for a very long time, and really amazing things happened in them. And they were completely, and this is, again, I'm constructing a possibly really false narrative of what this was, but they were completely not related to the institutional system of delivering art to the people. It was its own scene, divorced from the greater world, but really, really influencing the greater world to the work that was happening in these places. And some of these artists are my friends now, and I really admire them. John Jesserin and Mac Wellman, people that were doing work that that I really, really admire. And I had this huge sort of constructed nostalgia for these kinds of places, and I wanted something about what I thought that spirit to sort of find it, to continue in my place. But I also knew that if I wanted it, the thing I was trying to create, to have any kind of longevity, that I would have to also function as an institution to some capacity. And that's something I'll talk about more in a little bit, what it means to kind of navigate those things. Because in some ways I became a traditional presenter in the sense that I commission work and pay artists and raise money from foundations and try to, and do things in a systematic way. But I don't want, but I also want it to feel like a place where anything can happen, and then where artists are actually running the show. And in a way that sort of means that we're kind of this hybrid thing. So the Chocolate Factory opened in roughly, I call it, we opened for real in 2008, and we really opened in 2005, and we had these period of years where work was happening there, and I was curating it, and I was sort of getting my sea legs around what it meant to A, run a building, and B, do all of the work with artists and choose and try to build something that had a kind of a sense of a whole about it. But at that time, I was also working full-time as essentially the janitor of a place called Dance Theater Workshop, which is a really, really important place that no longer, well, it still exists. It doesn't really exist. It has a different name and a different kind of it's different in a lot of ways. And I was working full-time at DTW, and I learned a huge number of lessons from working there. Most of them lessons about what not to do. Because DTW was this venue that had, by the time when I came to work there, they'd been around for 40 years. They were hugely important to I get the downtown dance scene. So much important work was done there. So many amazing artists came up there. And then they had a space that was bigger than Chocolate Factory, but not really by that much. And I think when I went to the old DTW, it felt very similar in terms of the vibe of the place to what I was hoping and trying to do. And then they got it into their heads that they should build a big, pristine, beautiful, massive theater space, which they did at the base of a bunch of condominiums. And in doing that, they put themselves into a financial hole so great that they ultimately had to be rescued by Bill T. Jones and change their name to New York Live Arts and my time working there, running that building, A, I learned how to run buildings, B, I learned what it meant to be a part of an institution that was in over its head, that was trying to operate a large facility, that was really, in many ways, stuck inside certain kinds of modes of behavior related to where money is supposed to come from, where money is supposed to be spent, who should be coming and being in the audience of the work for the work. And just kind of a ship that got so big that you couldn't steer it quickly. And be flexible and react to the world as it changes in front of you. And so I learned a lot of lessons from working there. Not just, a lot of them just sort of functional administrative lessons about how I think staying small is crucial, staying flexible being crucial, only maintaining a physical building if it could be done in a way that it didn't drag us all down. or take all of our resources and all of our time. And they certainly made a lot of mistakes in doing that in the beginning. But one of the things I knew that I just didn't want to do was ever become a theater where I was concerned about the box office, or I was concerned about whether the work I was doing was going to upset somebody on my board of directors, or whether the work was going to make it difficult for me to raise money. And all of that stuff, which is something that I think really, for me, in my experience anyway, comes at it's like an economy of scale question. It comes when you reach a certain size, and then those problems happen. And I was really also thinking about, and I didn't say enough about this, but I should just come back to it. All of these decisions came from a selfish place of me as an artist wanting to facilitate my own work and wanting to make decisions based on what I needed and what I knew would make it easier to do what I needed to do, and wanting then to bring that kind of logic to the way I was trying to work with outside artists. So I was really trying to kind of run the place. I wanted the administrative strategy to be artistic in its thinking, if that makes any sense. And I wanted also to respond to what I considered, I was never an artist actually that's been part of the presenting system and have been presented by institutions. I've always, I'm not sure why this is actually, but for whatever reason, the work I've done is always just been produced by me. I mean, now I'm in an organization that supports what I'm doing, but it's an organization that I founded. So I never have had success going to PS 122 and asking for a gig and getting a gig and working inside that system. So I don't know a lot about it, but where I didn't know a lot about it, and I do know a lot about it now. And there are certain things about that system. I mean, the system is always changing. It's changed a lot in the last couple of years, but there are things about that kind of way of working that I wanted to shift. I wasn't really interested in curating in the way that I think, to generalize, a lot of institutions curate. Whereas, oh, here's a show, I'm going to buy your show, here you can do the show. It was much more about meeting an artist and finding what they're doing to be interesting, and then inviting them to do whatever the hell they want within the resources that I can provide for them. And of course, in the beginning, that to a large degree was which artists are eager enough to do it that they'll come and do this work without any resources or any money, and all I can give them is this space to work in. And now, it's kind of grown over the years to a place where this is actually something that's really great, to a place where it can be much more of a conversation that's sort of on a level playing field about what artists want to do relative to different kinds of spaces, different kinds of architecture, different kinds of modes of doing it. Like, Bonnie mentioned Big Dance Theater. So they had a show last year at BAM. They'll have a show next year at BAM again. But the fact that I'm able now to work with a group like that and artists that no one's ever heard of, and to sort of not be kind of hierarchical in my choices, I think is really, really amazing. And it's something that I don't think, and I didn't make this happen, but I don't think it could have happened 5 or 6 or 7 years ago in the same way. I feel like there's something that's sort of really changed about how artists relate to institutions, and I think it's at least partially because artists no longer feel that they need the institutions in the same way that they may be used to. And so now I'm running I don't like to call it an institution because it's so small. Our Chocolate Factory is a very small place, but in some ways it is an institution because we do get funding, and it is a gig it's a gig that can be difficult to get sometimes. But yeah, there was just something about the way I wanted to work with artists that was really artistically driven and not in any way gatekeeperish, where I'm like, yes, I'm holding the keys to the door, and I'm going to decide if you get to come in or if you don't get to come in, and I'm going to just put a frame around what you're doing and tell the world what they should think about it, which I think does play sometimes into the way in which certain institutions work, especially visual art institutions, which I think I'm going to talk about that a little later. But it's really, it just to like summarize, it really is not about shopping for work or choosing work. I'm meeting artists and choosing to work with artists. And then what the work becomes is what the work becomes. And in a way, it doesn't matter to me if the work is good or bad. I mean, often the work is good, often the work is really bad. It's more an issue of is the artist taking advantage of the opportunity, and is the artist pushing him or herself in some way to do something that they couldn't necessarily do before. And then one of the challenges that's coming up for me about doing that is one of the things that's been great in the last couple of years. I've traveled a lot more. I'm traveling internationally a lot more nowadays, and trying to meet artists and realizing that the system of how international work circulates around the world is so much like a marketplace where there are these works that are available to move. And I travel to these festivals and try to meet artists and get stuck in this place of, well, I'm not interested in booking your show, but I think you're interesting. I'd love for you to, can we figure out how you can come and just make something? And there's like no system in place for that to happen. It's really interesting. The way subsidy works is so much tied to a work that, just to make an example, like a work that is made in Brussels and premieres there and then tours around that region and then wants to tour to the United States, and there's subsidy for presenters who can pick that up. And I'm not interested in that. Not that it's bad, actually. There are some great work that tours that way, and there's some really great venues that are really well equipped to do that. But because we're so small, and I think we're so devoted to, for lack of a better word, I don't know, process, I guess, but not, devoted to facilitating artists making things, because that's what I need to do. It means that we're sort of operating at this weird kind of middle ground between presenting and producing and staying the hell out of the way. And so yeah, we're a presenter, but we're only sort of. And one of the things that definitely also leads to, and Bonnie sort of referred to this a little bit, is this, the work that we do. It's really difficult to know what to call it. There's work that we have that's theater. There's work that we have that's dance. There's work that we have that's visual. But really, I think that a lot of the artists that I'm working with, and I think it's a thing that maybe my entire generation is frustrated with in a lot of ways, is this question of having to decide what it is. And having to call it something so that the people that come to see it know how to receive it. And I think that a lot of the work that I'm interested in kind of sits in the middle in a kind of a way. I started as a theater director. I'm making work now that I call it dance. I don't know that it really is dance, but it fits much better into a dance context for whatever reason. And I think and a lot of artists that I'm working with, I think, have that same dilemma, and so we call ourselves interdisciplinary, but even that is so tricky. I don't even know what that really means. And I kind of wish we could live in a world where we could just get rid of the whole idea of the categories and just it is what it is. And this is one of the things that I think maybe was in my fantasy world was possible to do in some of these venues in the 80s where no one was cared about that stuff. That's probably totally not true, but I mean, I wish it were. But now, because I'm sort of operating also from a position of, yeah, I want us to survive. I want this to continue for as long as it makes sense. I don't want to worry about being thrown out of the space every 6 months. We're going to become an organization with some systems, and that means we have to raise money from foundations. To do that, we have to tell those foundations what we do. We have to describe it in ways that they can understand it. And then if we want people to come and review the work, we can't say, well, we have to say, is it dance or is it theater, or is it? And you have to make these choices. And all artists that are working now are confronted with this problem all the time. And I think of it as one of the sort of central problems that I'm dealing with at my place, and that I think everyone is dealing with. I think it's a problem. I don't have a solution for it. I don't know what you do about it. But I definitely have a desire for these categories to kind of go away, because I think in so many cases it's a really false dichotomy. Like, there's so much work being done in the dance context that refers to things that are happening in the theater context, and vice versa. But those two worlds don't necessarily know that that cross conversation is going on. And there's kind of almost willful, I mean, ignorance is the wrong word, 'cause that makes it sound worse than it really is, but like there's just a lack of understanding of what these different kind of circles of people are doing, and in some cases they're so similar, and they could learn a lot from each other, actually, because their paths of inquiry overlap so much. But in a lot of cases, especially in New York City, where there's so much dance happening and there's so much theater happening, that if you decide that you want to sort of be on top of what's going on, you have to kind of specialize. And you can't necessarily go see everything. You can't see everything in New York City. It's not physically possible to do. In some sort of ways, it keeps the art forms back. It holds them back a little bit, because they're not learning. They don't know what they don't know. So to sort of wrap this part of the thing up, so I learned this huge lesson about the importance of staying small. And one of the things about the Chocolate Factory that is really written into our bylaws now is that we will never grow beyond a certain point. And we kind of have one of the things that may have to happen in the future, and I really hope that this, and of course, knock on wood, we may have to blow the thing up at some point and decide that it can no longer exist. And I hope that could really happen. I worry that our board wouldn't let us do it, but I really do think that one of the problems of institutions is that they sometimes outlive their usefulness, or lose sight of why they existed in the first place. And because in this country we seem so obsessed with growth, and if you're not growing, you're not succeeding, it does really directly or indirectly push a lot of organizations into a place where they are bigger than they should be, and now they have to make decisions based on other kinds of factors. Will this fill all the seats? Can I charge more money for the ticket for this kind of show? Will this make a really wealthy person want to give me money? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can kind of go down the line of all the problems that it can create. And so I learned this lesson from DTW, and I worked there for 5 years until I could finally leave and work full-time at my place. And those 5 years were entirely consumed with trying to respond to those problems that became totally intractable. Because they had built this theater, which happens to be beautiful, and some great work happened in there. So it's not like it was all, but there was this constant battle over. I mean, Neil did some shows there that are just. No, I just want to say it's really important. It's a beautiful place, and I loved it. But in the office, we were constantly confronted with somebody on the board who was very, very wealthy, who was like, "Well, that thing was so weird. Why the hell did you do that weird show?" And then someone saying, well, if we could just charge $50 for the tickets, then that would make a huge difference, but that means we'd have to do something that people will pay $50 to come and see, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, constantly. So I learned this lesson about staying small. And that's one of the reasons that the building that we have now is small. It's small on purpose, because the cost of operating it just on the rent and the utilities and so on are really manageable. Where we don't have to worry about selling tickets, and also because it is small, we're sold out almost all the time, because we don't have that many seats, and people are really, and so it's a nice kind of, where I don't know, it's like making it, what's the word for that? We're making it exclusive, and we're keeping it, yeah. But one of the things that also enables us to do as we've grown a little bit is on the odd occasion that we want to do a big project, we can then just find a way to do with a bigger project. We don't have to, I can go find another space that's big enough and figure out a way to produce it in that way. We did a show at Abrons Art Center with Luciana Achagar that we just sort of produced and stuck in a much bigger place at Abrons, and we didn't have to absorb all the cost of having an enormous venue to take care of. We partnered with somebody else. And so I think looking to the future of that, we'll never be a place that's going to have a big venue. We may do projects that are larger in scale, but we'll do them somewhere else. So yeah, and to come back to my very, very beginning comment, like I think of it as an organization that's administered from an artistic point of view, and bringing it back to the main reason that we exist to be in the first place is that I'm an artist and I want to make my work there, and I want other artists who are also working there to feel the same way that I get to feel when I work there. That they're not having to navigate a bureaucracy of administrators that don't understand where they're coming from. I mean, those things, there are also bad things about that kind of way of working, but it's mostly, I think, really, really good. And so in a weird kind of way, that leads me to this thing that I've only realized lately is true, that the thing that I do as a curator and the thing that I do as a person who makes art are the same thing. I didn't realize this for a long time, but I actually now think of them as completely wrapped together. The way I'm relating to artists and encouraging them to do things and the way in which I'm working on my own stuff are completely commingled. And this makes me feel in an even much stronger way how I'm different from what I thought curators did before I was ever a curator. And and to explain that a bit, I'm talking about when I heard the word curator when I was younger, I always thought, I thought of the museum curator, someone that went around to studios and shows work. It was like, oh, your work, here's your 5 works that you're showing me. I'll take that one and I'll take that one, and I'll go to this other artist and I'll take this work and this work, and I'll put them all together, and then I'll explain to you in the outside world why these two things should relate to each other, and I'll write about it. And there's this kind of, it's this idea of placing a narrative onto or a frame around work. And I just sort of realized that because the way that I'm working on my own stuff is so, like, that would make me furious for someone for someone to come in and say, well, here's the part of your work that I think I'll take and do this and forget the rest of it. Like I'm so not interested in that I could never curate from that place. It's a kind of, maybe one way to look at it is as a kind of a hierarchy, and I'm not interested in hierarchies in that way. And to take that further, I'm not really interested in success. And by the way, I should explain this. I'm sorry. All these pictures you're looking at, maybe in case you didn't know this. So I'm showing you photographs from 2 of the 2 works that I have made most recently. Some of you saw this one. It's called Hotbox. And then the other images are from this piece called Selective Memory that I made in 2010. And I'll talk about them later, but I just realized I never told you what those were. So sorry. Those are pictures from shows. But to go further with what I was saying before, because I'm not interested in kind of a hierarchical way of working with artists, I'm also not, when I say to artists, I want you to come and, and this is a really cheesy kind of phrase, but that people use in grant applications all the time, but like freedom to fail, to experiment and fail. And I sort of realizing that actually, yeah, I'm interested in that, literally, because I need that for my own work. And so I have to kind of say, yeah, I'm totally not interested in success. I'm interested in working with artists, and if what they make is a pile of, if it's a turd on the stage at the end of the day, I have to be okay with that. And in fact, if I look back at a season and all of the work was good, that would mean that I've screwed up my job a little bit, because I'm either being a little too safe or a little too narrow in my thinking about the kind of thing that I'm doing. And I'm not going to say that I'm good at it or bad at it. I'm learning how to do it, but I have just learned this lesson that failure is actually really important. And if you if you're really interested in facilitating artistic experimentation, then you have to embrace failure and be happy about failure in a kind of way. And honestly, that led me. There are artists that I've been working with in the last couple of years that I think are crucially important to the field that maybe aren't I feel like the presenting world or the field that we in New York City that we're operating in is to some degree trend oriented, and there are always artists who are hot stuff and artists who are formerly hot stuff, and there are artists that are maybe going to be hot soon, or like there's always a kind of cycle that goes on, and that's just natural, I think. But there are some really, really important artists that I've worked with lately that I feel like are on the wrong end of that cycle for no good reason, you know. And I mentioned some of these artists before, John Dresser and Mac Wellman, and a few other artists like that I just admire really deeply, and who are making really relevant work, who aren't necessarily getting the big gigs that they used to get, and I never understood why that is. And there's something that I'm interested about, that I feel like it relates in some way to what I was just saying before, that I'm interested in what artists are doing, and I have to, like, in a way, I'm going against. I mean, we're a small place, so we're not trend makers, but I don't have to go with the trend. I don't have to worry about if this artist is hot enough that we're going to get a lot of attention for them. And I think that I can also, and then the people that come to the Chocolate Factory can learn so much from some of these artists too, that it's just really, really, really important. We just had an artist, just to name an example, this guy from the Netherlands called Rob List, who's an American who moved to Amsterdam in the 80s and never came back, and I don't think anyone really knows him at all, but he's this artist that I've really, really, really been inspired by. And so I decided to invite him and to come and to make a work here, and I knew that nobody was necessarily going to be interested in him, or he wasn't going to get a huge amount of attention from the dance world, but enough people came, and I think, it's just an example of the way I'm trying to work. And I think that it's actually a lesson that John Jesperin actually taught me. Like, he said this thing to me about what it means to be like an artist with longevity, an artist who works and keeps working. It's just to focus on the work and not to focus on any of the other stuff, which I thought, which is really hard to do, I think, when you're younger and trying to establish any kind of going concern for yourself, getting a foothold. But he's maybe the first example of an artist that I actually saw really doing that, where he's just making this work, and he's not letting himself get consumed by the fact that he didn't get a certain grant, or that he didn't get to a certain gig or anything, and he just keeps going. And I think that in the long run, it's going to, when you look back at the body of his work. I mean, I don't mean to focus so much on him, but he's just someone that I think about all the time. Sorry, so I'm about to show you. So I'm going to shift now a little bit to talking about my work, and I'm going to show you now just a 5-minute excerpt from this piece called Selective Memory, which I made in 2010, and it's very much related to the thing that I made this year called Hotbox, and actually really represents a kind of a new way of working for me, or like maybe just to finally coming to a place where I felt like I was making something that I liked. And so I'll just play this for you, and then I'll sort of talk about what it is. Get out of the way. you. So that was just a short thanks, bit from that show, and I'll just talk a little bit about how I came to work in this way, and what it is about this that I'm trying to do. And there are really two sides of it, actually. There's one that's completely practical, and then there's the part that's more about my artistic, conceptual concerns. And they're really totally related to each other. As I said earlier, I gradually, as I was making work around town over years, I became very, very frustrated with the way in which I was working, the way in which my work was being received, the kind of normal production model that I was using. And as my work became more and more about technology, just from a practical point of view, it became really not helpful to work in that way. I needed to do this kind of work, I needed to be able to install a whole bunch of stuff into a space for many, many months at a time, and work for months without knowing where it was going to wind up, wasting a lot of time, procrastinating a great deal, which actually was a really sort of frustrating thing for example, for performers to do. It was really, really difficult to work with performers when I knew I only had them for 3 hours on a Wednesday, and I needed to get something done in that time that I had. And for me to work honestly, I needed to be able to sit in that room with a handful of other people for as long as it was going to take until we figured out what it is we were trying to do. And that honestly, much of the time was about sitting there, wasting time, getting to a place of sort of semi-boredom, being half asleep, where we no longer, where the idea could kind of come. And to do that, I needed to have people that could work more or less with me more or less full time. And to do that, I had to scale down to a certain kind of size, and I had to work without performers, because I couldn't find performers that I wanted to work with that could fit this kind of a thing into the life that they were having, because artists are often in that way working with many different kinds of things, and it wasn't really fair for me to ask someone to come and sit in there for 8 hours, and I might not even use them that day. They're just going to sit there, and nothing's going to happen. And so it led us to this kind of place where we decided that actually we needed to use the technicians as performers, which is how Madeline and myself came to be in this work ultimately, because Madeline was working with me on the video, and she was building the systems to facilitate the video work that's happening, and we just decided, well, you'll just be the subject of the camera too. We'll just kill two birds. And that led us down this whole path that we're on today. And the way in which that relates to conceptual things is I got really frustrated with the narrative expectations of theater work. Even the work that I love in theater, John Jessurin's work, for example, or the Worcester Group, there even artists who are exploding or frustrating ideas about narrative are still working in relationship to a certain narrative tradition. Even if it's an oppositional relationship, they're still looking back at a kind of theater tradition. And I found that, for me, really, really, I guess limiting, but it wasn't. I just knew that it wasn't the thing that I was kind of trying to do. I was trying to find a way of sustaining an idea that had nothing to do with language. And that led me to a real interest in, I guess, what I would call cinematic language, or montage, or how certain kinds of things in filmmaking get around that kind of problem. But knowing that I didn't want to make movies, knowing that I wanted to make that I needed to make performances, because there's something about the relationship between an audience and a body, and a mediated body, that can have a kind of choreographic relationship that I find personally really interesting. There is something. So really, I I sort of realized that what I'm trying to do is make performances that are all about video. But performance is still is sort of the operative word there. It's using video and the way in which we look at video to do certain things, to work in response to the way in which we look at video as people most of the time on YouTube, on the internet, to sort of recalibrate our idea of time and the passage of time, and ultimately, hopefully, to get to a place where we can look at something for what it is and not for what we imagine it should be inside of a narrative framework. To just look at an image for what the image is. Which is, to me, means kind of not giving anything. And this is impossible, so it's not really true, but it's what I try to do is, I don't want to really give anything to the audience. I don't want to get anything back from the audience. I just want the transaction to occur, and I want that to be what it is. And the way in which I've tried to get there, so, we work with a really small group of people who perform multiple tasks. So for example, I make the video and I make the music, and in this new piece, I perform in it, and everyone is just kind of, we're sort of trying to collapse all of that into this small, flexible group of people where what it means to be a technician and what it means to be a performer, it's the same thing. There's no difference. And that actually does affect what the performance is, because we make the performance about finding solutions to technical challenges. So in a way, the performance is a technical thing as well. And there's something about doing this. So like in this piece that here, there was this, what this piece really was just an hour-long study of a woman's face. It's just really one image or one person looked at from a lot of different ways. Nothing really ever happens in the performance. There's this behind this wide screen. There's Madeline standing there, and there's this network of cameras behind there that are moving that we control with software that we made that do these really simple cuts and pans and zooms. Cinema 101, how you can construct a kind of scene, but it's a scene where nothing really happens, and it's just kind of trying to really gradually subvert the expectations of the viewer. And it's an expectation that comes from our collective history of watching movies and television. This idea of montage, we have been trained as a culture to look at things and expect something, or to paint a picture around something, or to fill in the blanks around something. And what we tried to do, and to get out of that, it was just to stay there so long, really, that the spectator can kind of go through. We always refer to them in rehearsal as the 5 stages of grief, where it's the audience is going to get really pissed off for a while, and then they're going to get frustrated, and then they're going to be bored, and then they're going to be in denial that they're actually there, and then they're going to maybe hopefully accept what we're putting there and just look at it. It's all, and I'm not saying that we succeed or that everyone has that experience, but it is, for me, what I think of when I look at sort of the experimental films that I'm inspired by. I think of as time stopping, a recalibration of time. This is the technical thing that I was talking about. So this will give you, and in the work that we're making now, the new piece, it's much more complicated even. But this is a really simple. Just to give you an idea, it's 2 security cameras that you see in the lobby of any office building. These cameras that can go like this. And we wrote this software in MaxMSP to control them, and we just made this series of cues that Madeline was cycling through on a schedule. And then everything else about the piece was sort of happening in reaction to that. So there's a sound score that happens, but it's basically a computer, a Max patch that looks at certain information from the video and responds to it. So it all just kind of goes. Lots of cables. But really, it's like using these really simple, broken tools. And there's not a whole lot going on in that. But I want to talk for a second about about montage and what it means. I mean, I don't know how much any of you guys have studied cinema or movies, but there's this, you know, montage is just cutting one thing to another thing, and then how that tells a story. I mean, just put it into a really simple way. And people have, they're experimental filmmakers that I really, really like. You know, Maya Deren or Jack Smith or Carolee Schneemann, or even in the 70s in the auteur movement, you know, the Antonionis and the Coppolas and the Werner Herzogs, people that were finding different ways of responding to those expectations around narrative using cinematic tools, montage. But this thing that I was really, really drawn to when we started to work was this idea, there's this thing that is called the Kuleshov effect or the Kuleshov experiment. There's this Russian filmmaker from the 20s, Lev Kuleshov, who did these experiments. I'll just actually show this to you, where he just got an actor, just took one shot of an actor, cut it with different images. The image of the actor never changes. It's the same shot. But people watching it would just put different kinds of narrative contexts onto his face, basically, based on what they're juxtaposing him against, which is the, you know. And I find that really, really interesting. You know, it's the same shot of the guy, you know, but you read so many different things into. And there's this also really humorous, this might be too loud, but.
Now the third way is
Hitchcock was really, really influenced by this idea.
Cinematics, the assembly of film, and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now I have a close-up. Let me show you what you see. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks. Girl in a bikini. He smiles.
See, so,
Dirty old man.
yeah. So you get the idea. It's really, and so much of how we experience time or how we tell stories or how it's so deeply influenced by this idea that I think we don't even notice it anymore. I think that we've been like rewired as a people to automatically make those connections. And I'm really interested in why that is, and I'm really interested in this work and trying to disrupt it through repetition, and by kind of, we call it collapsing when we work, but just like coming to the same image to such an extent that kind of process can kind of collapse and hopefully kind of disappear, but leaving a kind of, this is conceptual cheesy talk, but like a kind of residue of all of that stuff to stay behind. Like, so this piece that we just made, Hotbox, the way we talked about it was we got really interested in the way in which certain films were made, or like the conditions in which certain films were made, how those conditions influenced the images in the film. And the two that we really looked at intensely were Apocalypse Now, the Coppola film, and Fitzcarraldo, the Werner Herzog film with Klaus Kinski. And those films are both interesting to me because they're these beautifully composed, really beautifully composed films, gorgeous films, that have very different relationships to narrative using and montage, but they're both films that were made under really difficult conditions. You know, Apocalypse Now, it's Martin Sheen everyone is having heart attacks and nervous breakdowns, and they're on drugs, and Marlon Brando is 300 pounds and never read the script, and and Francis Ford Coppola starts going around with a load of guns, trying to decide if he wants to kill himself, and all of these things influence the imagery. And in the Werner Herzog film, the same way. Klaus Kinski is, by all accounts, like a maniac, and everyone wanted to kill him. And there's something about the kind of the murderous intensity of the relationship of Klaus Kinski and Werner Herzog that finds its way into the images. And so we were interested in kind of trying to marry those two things together, finding a way to focus on an image, or in this case, like a really small series of images in an interrelationship that could have some, could give some kind of the, I don't know, residue of how the images were made, which is why we set up conditions where I was intoxicated and we were exercising constantly, and just in our own little sort of way around this, I think of as a joke of authenticity, which is, you know, and this is why I was so interested in like the auteur filmmakers in the 70s, is this idea, they got really addicted to this idea. And actually this happens in theater also. You know, the method actors, the American method actors. This ridiculous idea about authenticity, this notion that Coppola had that the only way to make a film about going crazy in the jungle is to actually go to the jungle and actually go crazy. That there's no artistic strategy to get there in an easier way. And so, I was really interested in that. I think it's a ridiculous idea. And so we set up for ourselves certain conditions where we just had to play that game of really doing it. And not because we're not performers, we're technicians. I don't bring to the table a skill set that I can use to achieve a result. And I have nothing against performers. Like I mean, I think that there are really. I have a lot of respect for what performers can do. But because we've chosen to work in a way where we're not privileging that part of the process anymore. We're just trying to do something technical. That became it connected actually to this idea of authentically doing something, because we're just trying to do something. We're just trying to do something, and that to me also has a relationship to what content means, because I'm not really sure what the content of this work is. There is content, but I don't know that. But I don't know what I would call it, because we're not there. It's just images, and those and people, I think. And those images relate to other images, and when you watch them, you're going to make some kind of relationship between those images. I'm not really interested in trying to tell you what to make of them. I'm interested in just having you be there and look at them. So I don't know what the content is. And that leads me to this question of, like, people are always asking me, why is this performance? Why isn't it a visual? Why isn't it, or why is it a performance that I have to sit for the entire hour to see? Why can't you do this in a gallery and I can kind of come in and see it for the time that I want to? And I think that there's something that, and the answer to me is because it's so important that you give the time to it. There's so much, the way in which the images unfold is all about time. And if you were to situate this in a place where the spectator had control over time, I doubt that they would give it very much time. And I think the images wouldn't carry in the same way, if they carry at all. And this work, especially because there's no, it's this tricky thing. I call this work dance. It was reviewed as dance. There's no dancing in this work. I don't know that. There are things about it that I think of as choreography, but that relates to the way in which the lights move and the cameras move and the way in which we relate to them. But I'm not a choreographer. That would be an insult to choreographers, to real choreographers, to say that because I don't have any experience in that world. But I do know that when I show this work to theater critics, they just respond to the fact that there's no story in it, or that they don't understand what the characters are. And this is really, this is maybe a comment on the state of criticism, but it's also just a thing of I do think that I'm making work that doesn't really fit comfortably into one of these boxes, and so I have to make a choice, and so I call it dance. There is, I think, maybe a relationship in this piece, especially considering what I'm doing in terms of my presence in it, that maybe refers to what I mean, the performance art pieces of the 80s that I've seen on video and have a huge amount of respect for. But then again, that has a whole connotation, and I don't think that I don't know that performance art is a thing that people, you can't call it that now. It's not really a field of its own anymore. It's gotten absorbed into dance, I think, a little bit. Which is just my way of explaining, for those of you who saw the piece, why it was, if you knew that I was really, really drunk in this performance. So like, it's mostly about my face, but we figured out that for my face to work, I had to be unaware of how my face looked. And so wrapping it back to this idea of authenticity, I just got really, really drunk and then did an exercise regimen that just made me completely exhausted. And so I did the entire performance really just trying not to fall over, which was a lot of fun to do. And when I was thinking about, because this question comes all the time, why is my work not considered, why am I not calling it installation work? And I could make versions of this that were installations, I suppose. But duration is important, and I thought about two examples of work that I've seen recently that I think refer to duration. Well, not one I didn't see, I couldn't see it, but Einstein on the Beach. Maybe some of you went to see it at BAM. But the idea of duration and surrendering to a duration, I think of as being so crucial to that work. Committing to the time that it needs. Or another example, if any of you went to see the Christian Marclay piece, The Clock, which is just this 24-hour-long video of various films of clocks cut together so that it just moves, and no one was ever allowed to see the whole thing. I don't think you were ever able to go and sit for 24 hours. But when I was there, most people sat there for like 5 minutes, and there was this thing that I was like, oh, and I think that people are completely missing, I think, what's in that work, which is this idea of just giving something time and then maybe slowing down or speeding up or just getting away from your own notion of what time is supposed to be. And I'm over my time, so this is too big a topic to go into, but I think this actually relates a lot to the way in which the Chocolate Factory is situated as a presenter inside the field, where now there's all of this interest and discussion around performance in museums. And the ways in which visual art curators and people working in the museum world are approaching performance now that they're so interested in it. And the parts that I'm always finding interesting when I meet and talk to people doing this is they have no notion of the kind of time and preparation and sort of consideration that performers have to bring to creating a space for what they do, but they also have a really different mentality around what a spectator is supposed to bring to the table. Like a good example would be, I don't know if any of you went to see Sarah Mitchelson's piece in the Whitney, the devotion study. And the night that I was there, at least, you could see who was there from the dance world and who was there from the visual art world based on who stayed, right? I mean, I don't know if that was true when you were there, but like people gave it 20 minutes and like, oh yeah, I got this, and so they got up and they left. And there's something about that that's, I think, really up for discussion around what it means to give attention to something. And I think that this goes back to YouTube or television or whatever, that I think that we are at a place as a culture where we don't really like to give a lot of attention to anything. And so I think my desire to make these kind of pieces is really, in a way, self-satisfying, and that I want a situation where I can get bored. I think boredom is really important, and I don't mean boredom in a bad way at all. I mean just like time to have nothing in your brain a little bit, just some time to sit with it, and that's why I make these things that have no content and last for an hour. So I'll finish, but this is more like a question that I'm asking for myself all the time. And I think is really a huge part of what I do, is this question I'm always asking myself: is it actually possible to be an artist and the presenter? And I don't know the answer to that question, but it's something that I think that I'm trying to do. And I think that's like the central question around all of this: why I started this venue that I run, and why I make the kind of work that I'm making now. So it's a question. Maybe you guys have some questions also. Sorry, I went like 10 minutes long. I thought I wouldn't have an hour of anything to talk about, but.
Hello. I really liked your presentation, and you had a lot of like really good things that like concepts that I feel like go against the grain of like this industry. And I just, one of the first things I wrote down was like what you said about you're not trying to be a gatekeeper,
Right.
a mentality. And like I was thinking, you know, even like with your concept, because I'm in video and film and all that, but like I don't want to do Hollywood narration. And like I kind of have that same issue too. It's like I have to kind of conform to a content. And like what you even said too is like I have content, but then I wrote it down. You're like, I have non-content, but to me that's content.
Sure. Yeah.
You know. And then my biggest question is like, how do you preserve like all these? Not like you're trying to rage against the machine, but like you really are. But just like in a like determined sense or a determined state of like not trying to rage, but just like bringing art. Like, how do you preserve that? Like, seriously, like there's got to be some kind of like something that you do that's like preserving.
You mean like
this.
my own?
Kind of like your rage against the institution. Not that I'm trying to say that you're raging, but like on the outside, that's what it looks like. And I feel like that's probably what's going to be the next wave of art, like true arts. And I kind of feel like you're like semi like not really like pioneering it, but like kind of bringing it back, because like even like when you're explaining your history about it, you know, and like the theaters and you know how New York was different 17 years ago.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I think it go. I mean, I sort of, I think it just goes in sort of. Well, I'm not really sure. I think it goes in cycles, but I think that also, you know, and environments also change, and then in a weird sort of way, it's you know, it's convenient for me to talk about myself in opposition to the institutions that are larger than me, that I'm also working with in some ways. It's like a nice. It's like it's. I mean, it's what I really do set out to do, and it's a sort of nice wrapper as a way of talking about it. But at the same time, what happens with that too is that I think that some people think of my venue now as the too established place, and now they want to, and now they need. I think there are younger artists now that need to go and make something that up is in opposition to me, even though I'm I think really small, and I think completely unknown. I don't know what my relevance is to the larger world outside of this very small world that I really cater to, but. I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I'm trying to, but this. Preservation. I'm just trying to do it. Yeah, I'm just trying. I mean, it comes down to practically just like, here's what I want to do. It's not really about. I don't think of I don't have enemies or competitors. You know, like the life's too short for that, and there's no. And this is all like we're all working in a field that's so impoverished anyway that to think of us as competing with one another is like the most cosmic joke imaginable, because if you win, what do you have? What does the winner have? You know, none of us are coming away with really much of anything. So I think it's more like. I'm not trying to work against other institutions. I'm trying to draw lessons from what I have learned, saw as sort of negatively entrenched kind of modes of operation that I'm. So it's really just about doing what here's what we're trying to do, and just trying to do that, and try not to worry too much about any of the rest of it, and also knowing that success, whatever that even means, is such a long-term proposition. Like it's not really. I don't know. There's no instant gratification. You don't know that you've succeeded until it happened. Like you find out that you succeeded 3 years ago, and that you know. And I think that the artists I really admire are just trucking along, even when people just don't seem to care at all. I mean, they're just going to do it because they know they have to do it. Like it's like a mental disease or something. Like that, you know, that you're going to do it regardless of whether anyone thinks that what you're doing is worthwhile. But I don't, like, talking about yourself in relationship to Hollywood stuff, I wouldn't even know where to start with that. That's not the world that I've ever, you know what I mean? I don't have any experience in that world. That's a whole different kind of set of circumstances and problems to relate to. You know what I mean? I don't know. Good luck with that. But
my question's about your relationship to your audience. How do you assume the commitment level of your audience and the knowledge that they bring to your performances, or do you try to manipulate them so to work with the structure that you're working with and those things that you're presenting?
I definitely am not trying to manipulate my audience, and I don't have any assumptions about their degree of knowledge or interest in, like, or you know, and it's. This is not even on purpose. This is one of the things that I think, it's one of the good and bad things about running a really small ship. You know, we only have 3 full-time people. There's nobody who can even think about that stuff, really, who's in the audience. And because, in a weird sort of way, we function inside this community of people. It's kind of a niche inside a niche inside a niche, where there's just this, and it's one of the great things about New York, that anything that you're doing, there are people that are going to be maybe intensely interested in it, and enough of them to sort of make it, to sustain it some. And we often manage to do that at the Chocolate Factory for a really small, but I think really engaged and important group of people who hopefully can just bring some attention to it, even if they don't really know what it is.
So when you write works, you're catering to those people?
No. I'm just trying to make the work. And when I was talking before about feeling that there was a kind of like a mental disorder about being in, like, I feel like I just have this need to do it. You know, like I really do feel like if I could be happy and deliver the mail, I'd be a much happier person. You know, like, I'm just making this stuff because I can't imagine doing anything else, if that makes any sense. But before you ask, but the question you ask is, I mean, I feel like I didn't give you a very good answer, but there is something. It's a really important question to ask, like, who's watching it and why, and it's something that I think we could all do. All of us from any point of view of this kind of stuff could do a better job of considering, for sure.
Hi. When you were talking about doing your thing for yourself and the selfishness involved in it, and just getting that space to work in, I struggle with that as well, and I'm wondering, where did you get the support for that? Because I know that it's one thing to want that, but to actually be able to do it financially with support from other people, I don't know, your family, I don't know, how did you go around that? And
right.
Do you remove the selfishness? Because we're also talking about the relationship and the audience. Do you put that aside for the audience, or do you just kind of put it there and be like, well, hope you like it, or hope you don't like it, or whatever?
Okay, so there's like 2 parts to that question.
Yeah.
So in terms of finding a space and how and navigating like the real world challenges of doing it, there's 2 things. Because of the jobs I'd had, I knew a lot about buildings and how buildings work. And so I came into it from a situation of having some degree of savvy around knowing what, like, so one of the things I think that artists, when they start spaces, they fall into this trap really easily of not knowing what, there's so many things that you don't know what to expect. And I knew what to expect. But really, I mean, the way that we did it was 2 things. My wife and I, Sheila, so I founded this place, you should know this, she's not here, but I founded it with another person, who's my wife, Sheila. We borrowed money against our house. We borrowed 25 grand, which we still have not been paid back. And which just by the way, is an extraordinarily low budget. It was like that was just a deposit on the rent to get the lease in the place, and then do just the bare minimum of things to it to make it even remotely usable. And then we both ran it on a volunteer basis for almost 5 years. So, we each both had full-time jobs and also worked essentially full-time on trying to get what little resources we could to keep the thing going. And it was also, and we also had to learn. There's an enormous kind of crazy leap of faith that goes into it, especially in the beginning, because it was for the first 4 years that we existed, it was always a month-to-month situation in terms of the cash. Like, we never knew that we were going to have enough money to pay the rent the following month. And getting to a place where you could be comfortable with that was really, like, it's interesting. When you can get to a place emotionally as a person where you're like, well, yeah, we may be ruined in a month, but that's okay. I can still sleep at night. That's fine. And then we gradually, like, it just built up really, really gradually. I feel like it's the thing that it's the hardest thing for artists to do, especially if they want to make some kind of machine for themselves, is you have to put all of this effort into it. And then if there's ever a payoff, it takes years and years and years. Or it did for me, anyway. And it's not as if it's over and I've won the race and now I have all the things that I want. And it's all, I don't know. It's also we got really lucky too. We have a building where we pay below market rent, and we have a very long lease, and we've been able to convince the city to help us try to buy it now. And there's all of these things that have been really. That's a long conversation, and I could totally talk to you about what it means to start and run a space, because I could give you a lecture about that just alone. But and I probably say don't, and I would say just don't even do it. Like, I don't know that it's there are real downsides to it, and there are plenty of people I know and love who have burned out as artists because of having spaces. But in terms, so what was the other part of your question? It was about how.
Put aside the selfishness aspect.
Mm-hmm.
You actually have to perform for an audience to bring in revenue,
right.
bring in a crowd.
Right.
So you put that aside and decide, I don't really care for that.
Oh, no, I totally care. I mean, it's not, when I say selfishness, what I mean is that I didn't start my space from this place of, I want to serve a community of artists. Like, that can't, but in terms of, I really do, I care a lot about this idea that the place I run, people can feel welcome to come there and then be part of a conversation around what they're seeing. I'm really, really interested in that. It's not, I mean, I don't, it's a really hard thing. I don't know that, like, for example, it's a thing that we struggle with people that live in, like, it's funny because we're situated in this neighborhood, Long Island City. It's a kind of, it's completely changed now, it's gentrified. But really very few of the people in our audience come from our local neighborhood. It's mostly people that come from other parts of the New York City. And it's something that we're always actually struggling with, of like, come on in. This is not, we're not talking down to you. We're not trying to, but it's a really difficult thing to do. But I'm really, really interested in making the place feel welcoming to people that come. Like, I mean, and it does matter if people. Right, it's hard to say. Because I mean, I went through. I mean, the audience I have now is not very. I don't know that I don't have a very big audience now, but I didn't have really any audience 7 years ago, and it's hard for me to say whether, like, if I went for 20 years of this and no one ever came, if I could continue to. I don't know. It's hard to know, but yeah.
Okay, well, we have a reception for everyone, unless there are more questions. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.